The cold November wind bit through Hannah Graham's thin wool coat as she raised the axe above her head, her breath coming out in ragged white clouds that disappeared into the darkness around her. It was past midnight in Colorado City, Colorado, and the temperature had dropped well below freezing, but the small pile of firewood beside her cabin door had dwindled to almost nothing, and her younger brother Samuel was sick with fever inside, needing warmth to make it through the night. The year was 1882, and winter had come early to the high country, catching everyone unprepared after the unusually mild autumn. She brought the axe down hard, but her frozen fingers betrayed her, and the blade glanced off the log at an awkward angle, nearly causing her to lose her balance. Hannah steadied herself against the chopping block, fighting back tears of frustration and exhaustion. She had been out here for over an hour, and the meager stack she had managed to split would barely last until morning. Her father had died 6 months ago in a mining accident, and her mother had passed from consumption 2 winters before that, leaving Hannah at 22 to care for her 14-year-old brother alone. The small ranch they owned was struggling, and she had sold most of their livestock just to pay for medicine and supplies to get them through the season. She positioned another log and raised the axe again, her arms trembling from fatigue. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and she would not burden them with her troubles. Everyone in this territory had their own hardships to bear, and Hannah Graham had her pride, even if pride could not keep a fire burning or food on the table. That is no way to swing an axe in the dark, miss. You will take off your foot before you split another log. Hannah spun around, nearly dropping the axe in surprise. A tall figure stood at the edge of the lamplight that spilled from her cabin window, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she gripped the axe handle tighter, raising it defensively. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know how to use this." The man held up both hands in a peaceful gesture and took a slow step forward into the light. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes that caught the lamplight with a warm brown color. His face was weathered from long days in the sun, but his features were kind, and there was no threat in his posture. He wore a heavy coat and chaps, and a horse stood patiently behind him, its reins hanging loose. "I mean no harm, miss. I was riding back to my camp and saw your light. Seems strange to see someone chopping wood at this hour. I thought there might be trouble." His voice was deep and had a slight drawl that suggested he came from somewhere south, maybe Texas or Oklahoma territory. Hannah did not lower the axe. "There is no trouble that concerns you. I am managing fine on my own." The cowboy's eyes traveled to the small pile of wood she had managed to split, then to the much larger pile of uncut logs beside the cabin, and finally to her face, which she knew must be pale with exhaustion and cold. He said nothing for a moment, just stood there studying the situation with a calm, assessing gaze that made her feel both defensive and strangely hopeful. "Begging your pardon, miss, but you do not look fine. You look about ready to drop where you stand, and that axe is nearly as big as you are." He took another careful step forward. "My name is Fletcher Kane. I work for the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of here. I know Tom Reeves, the owner. Good man. He would have my hide if he knew I rode past a lady in need without offering help." "I told you, I do not need help," Hannah insisted, but her voice wavered slightly. The truth was, she desperately needed help, but accepting it from a stranger in the middle of the night seemed dangerous and improper. Fletcher Kane tilted his head slightly, and something in his expression softened. "I can hear someone coughing inside your cabin. Sounds like a child. If you are out here in the cold and dark trying to chop enough wood to keep a sick little one warm, then yes, miss, you do need help, and there is no shame in accepting it." Hannah felt her resolve crumble. Samuel had been coughing all evening, and the fever had not broken despite the willow bark tea she had been forcing him to drink. She was exhausted, cold, and frightened, and this stranger with the kind eyes was right. She did need help. "That is my brother Samuel," she said quietly, lowering the axe slightly. "He is 14. He has had a fever for 3 days, and I cannot seem to get it to break. The cold is making it worse, and we are nearly out of firewood." Fletcher nodded and moved forward with more confidence now, holding out his hand for the axe. "Then, let me finish this pile for you, miss. You should get back inside where it is warm. I will have you enough wood to last a week before I go." Hannah hesitated for just a moment longer, then handed him the axe. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, and she felt the roughness of his calloused hands, the warmth of his skin, even in the freezing air. He took the tool with an easy confidence and moved to the chopping block, testing the weight and balance of the blade. "You should sharpen this," he said conversationally. "A sharp blade does most of the work for you, saves your arms." "I know," Hannah replied, feeling defensive again. "I just have not had time." Fletcher glanced back at her with a slight smile. "I was not criticizing, miss, just observing. Now get inside before you freeze solid. I will stack the wood by your door when I'm finished." Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could not accept such charity from a stranger, but another gust of icy wind cut through her coat and made the decision for her. She nodded once and turned toward the cabin, then paused and looked back. "Thank you, Mr. Kane. Truly, I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." He had already positioned a log on the block, but he paused and looked at her. "You would have kept swinging that axe until you either finished the pile or collapsed, I imagine. You seem like a determined woman, but there is no need for thanks. This is just what neighbors do out here." "We are not exactly neighbors. You said your ranch is 10 miles away." Fletcher shrugged and smiled. "In this country, 10 miles makes you neighbors. Now go on, miss. Check on your brother." Hannah hurried inside and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment as warmth from the fire washed over her. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it was solid and well built. Her father had constructed it himself when he first came to Colorado Territory 15 years ago. She pulled off her coat and moved to the narrow bed where Samuel lay, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored. She placed a hand on his forehead and found it still burning hot. His eyes fluttered open briefly, and he looked at her with confusion. "Hannah, what is that noise outside?" "Just someone helping with the firewood, Sam. Go back to sleep." Through the cabin walls, she could hear the steady rhythm of the axe striking wood, a clean, powerful sound that spoke of strength and experience. Fletcher Kane clearly knew what he was doing. The sound was oddly comforting, and Hannah found herself relaxing for the first time in hours. She refreshed the cool cloth on Samuel's forehead, added another log to the fire, and then moved to the small window to peek outside. The lamplight from the window illuminated Fletcher as he worked, and Hannah watched in fascination as he swung the axe with smooth, economical movements. There was no wasted effort in his motions, no struggle. He would position a log, raise the axe high, and bring it down in one fluid arc that split the wood cleanly every time. Within minutes, he had split more logs than she had managed in over an hour. She should not be watching him like this. It was improper, but something about his presence, about the steady confidence in his movements and the kindness in his gesture, made her feel less alone than she had felt in months. Since her father's death, she had carried the weight of responsibility for Samuel and the ranch entirely on her own shoulders, and it had been crushing her slowly, day by day. This stranger's simple act of taking the axe from her hands and finishing the work had lifted some of that weight, and she found tears streaming down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Hannah wiped her eyes quickly and moved away from the window, busying herself with preparing some coffee. It was the least she could do. She had some beans left, though supplies were running low. She would need to go into town soon to purchase more, which meant she would need money, which meant she would probably have to sell something else. Maybe the good china that had belonged to her mother. She hated the thought, but what use was china when they had barely enough food to fill their plates? The sound of the axe continued outside, for what seemed like a long time. Hannah made the coffee and checked on Samuel again. His fever seemed to have dropped slightly, or perhaps that was just wishful thinking. She changed the cloth on his forehead and pulled the blankets up higher around his shoulders. Finally, the chopping stopped. Hannah heard the sound of wood being stacked, and then silence. She waited, but there was no knock on the door. She moved to the window again and saw Fletcher leading his horse away, heading back into the darkness from which he had emerged. Without thinking, Hannah grabbed her coat and rushed outside. "Mr. Kane, wait!" He turned, one hand on his horse's reins. "Yes, miss?" She hurried to where he stood, suddenly unsure what she wanted to say. "I made coffee. The least I can do is offer you something hot to drink before you ride back out into this cold." Fletcher looked at her for a long moment, and she thought he might refuse. Then he nodded. "That would be welcome. Thank you, miss. I do not believe I caught your name." Hannah Graham. This was my father's ranch. He passed 6 months ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Fletcher said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion again. She led him to the cabin, and he tied his horse securely before following her inside. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing his dark hair more fully. He was taller than she had realized, and he had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. His eyes immediately went to Samuel in the bed, and concern flickered across his face. "How long has he had that fever?" Fletcher asked quietly, moving closer to examine Samuel without touching him. 3 days, like I said. I have been giving him willow bark tea and trying to keep him cool, but nothing seems to help." Hannah poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Fletcher. He accepted it gratefully and took a long drink before speaking again. "There is a doctor in town, Dr. Martin. Have you taken the boy to see him?" Hannah shook her head, feeling defensive again. "The doctor charges $2 for a visit. I do not have $2 to spare right now." Fletcher's expression darkened slightly, but not with judgment, with anger. "That is highway robbery. A doctor should not refuse to treat a sick child over money." "That is the way of things," Hannah said bitterly. "Dr. Martin is not a bad man, but he has his own bills to pay. Everyone does." Fletcher drank his coffee in silence for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Hannah found herself studying him more closely now that he was inside with proper light. He had a strong jaw with a day or two of stubble, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow. His hands were large and capable, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. There was something solid and dependable about him, something that made her want to trust him, despite having just met him. "I have some money saved," Fletcher said finally. "Not much, but enough. Let me pay for the doctor to come out here and examine your brother." "Absolutely not," Hannah said immediately. "I will not accept charity, Mr. Kane. You have already done more than enough by chopping the wood. It is not charity, it is neighborly kindness, and that boy needs proper medical attention." Fletcher set his cup down and looked at her intently. "Miss Graham, I understand pride. I have plenty of it myself. But sometimes pride needs to take a back seat to common sense. Your brother is sick, and if that fever does not break soon, he could get worse, much worse. Let me help." Hannah wanted to refuse, but she looked at Samuel lying in the bed, his face pale and flushed, his breathing still labored, and she knew Fletcher was right. She had been letting pride dictate her decisions, and it might cost Samuel his life. "I will pay you back," she said quietly. "Every cent. I do not know how or when, but I will pay you back." Fletcher smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less weather-worn. "Fair enough. I will ride into town first thing in the morning and bring the doctor back with me. In the meantime, keep doing what you have been doing. The willow bark tea is good, and keep him warm, but not too warm. You want to break the fever, not feed it." "How do you know so much about fevers?" Hannah asked. "I have 7 younger siblings back in Texas. I helped raise most of them after our mother passed when I was 16. I have dealt with my share of childhood illnesses." There was sadness in his voice, an old grief that he carried quietly. "I am sorry about your mother," Hannah said softly. "It was a long time ago, but thank you." Fletcher finished his coffee and set the cup down carefully. "I should get going. I have a long ride ahead of me, and I want to be up early to fetch the doctor." Hannah walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. The cabin felt warmer and safer with him in it, and she dreaded the return to solitude and worry. But she said nothing, just opened the door and followed him outside. The pile of split wood beside her door was enormous, far more than she had dared hope for. Fletcher had not just finished the pile, he had split enough wood to last at least 2 weeks, maybe more if she was careful. "Mr. Kane, this is too much," she said, gesturing to the wood. "Better to have too much than too little," he replied, untying his horse. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace and looked down at her. "I will be back tomorrow with the doctor. Try to get some rest, Miss Graham." "Thank you," Hannah said, and this time she put all her gratitude and relief into the words. "Thank you for everything." Fletcher touched the brim of his hat in farewell and then urged his horse forward, disappearing into the darkness. Hannah stood there for a long moment, watching the place where he had vanished, feeling something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. She went back inside, added wood to the fire, and settled into the chair beside Samuel's bed. She would not sleep tonight, she knew. She would keep watch over her brother and pray that the fever broke before morning. But for the first time in days, she did not feel completely alone. The night passed slowly. Hannah dozed fitfully in the chair, waking every time Samuel moved or coughed. She refreshed the cloth on his forehead regularly and got him to drink a little more willow bark tea around 3 in the morning. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold, Samuel's fever finally seemed to drop slightly. His breathing became easier, and some of the terrible flush faded from his cheeks. Hannah allowed herself to hope that the worst had passed, but she knew Fletcher was right. Samuel needed proper medical attention. She busied herself with morning chores, feeding the chickens and the 2 remaining cows, collecting eggs, and preparing a thin porridge for breakfast. Samuel woke briefly and managed to eat a few spoonfuls before falling back into a restless sleep. It was nearly noon when Hannah heard the sound of horses approaching. She went to the window and saw 2 riders coming up the long path to her cabin. Fletcher Kane was in the lead, and beside him rode an older man with gray hair and spectacles, carrying a black medical bag. Dr. Martin. Hannah met them at the door, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Fletcher dismounted quickly and helped the doctor down from his horse. "Miss Graham," Dr. Martin said, nodding politely. "Mr. Kane tells me your brother has had a fever for several days. Let me take a look at him." Hannah led the doctor inside, while Fletcher remained outside, tending to the horses. Dr. Martin moved to Samuel's bedside with practiced efficiency, setting his bag down and pulling out a stethoscope. He examined Samuel thoroughly, listening to his breathing, checking his throat and ears, feeling for swollen glands. After what seemed like an eternity, the doctor straightened and looked at Hannah with a serious expression. "Your brother has pneumonia, Miss Graham. It is not terribly advanced yet, but it will get worse if not treated properly. I am going to give you some medicine that should help, but he needs rest, warmth, and good nutrition. Can you provide those things?" Hannah nodded, fighting back tears of fear and relief. "Yes, I will do whatever it takes." Dr. Martin pulled several bottles from his bag and set them on the table, explaining how and when to administer each medicine. He also left instructions for preparing a chest poultice that would help ease Samuel's breathing. When he finished, he packed up his bag and looked at Hannah with kind eyes. "Your brother should recover fully with proper care, Miss Graham. But if the fever spikes again or his breathing becomes more labored, send for me immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes, doctor, thank you." Hannah hesitated, then asked, "What do I owe you?" "Mr. Kane has already settled the bill," the doctor replied. "He is a good man. You are fortunate to have such a helpful neighbor." After the doctor left, Fletcher came inside again. Hannah was standing by the table, staring at the bottles of medicine, her emotions overwhelming her. She heard him enter but did not turn around. "Miss Graham? Hannah, are you all right?" She shook her head, still not looking at him. "I do not know how to thank you. I do not even know how to begin to repay this kindness." Fletcher moved closer, and she felt his presence behind her, solid and comforting. "You do not need to repay anything. I told you, this is what neighbors do." Hannah finally turned to face him, and she found him standing much closer than she had expected. She could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the concern written clearly on his face. "Why are you being so kind to us? You do not even know us." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "When I was 16 and my mother died, we had nothing. My father had passed 2 years before that, and I was left to care for 7 younger brothers and sisters on my own. We were about to lose our farm when our neighbor, a man named Jacob Stone, showed up one day with food and supplies. He paid off our debts, helped me find work, and checked on us regularly until I was able to get back on my feet. He saved our family." Fletcher paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Before he left that first day, I asked him why he was helping us. He said that he had once been in a desperate situation, and someone had helped him when he needed it most. He said kindness is meant to be passed on, not paid back. That has stayed with me all these years. So, when I saw you out there last night, struggling in the dark, I saw myself at 16, and I knew what I had to do." Hannah felt fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Your family? Are they all right? Did they survive?" Fletcher smiled. "They did. My youngest brother is now running that farm in Texas, and he is doing a fine job of it. The others are scattered around, all doing well. I left a few years ago to make my own way, ended up here in Colorado Territory. I have been working for Tom Reeves at the Double R Ranch for about 2 years now. It is good work, good pay, and Tom is a fair man." "And you have no family of your own?" No wife waiting for you back at the ranch? Hannah asked, then immediately felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. I am sorry. That was forward of me. Fletcher chuckled. No, it was a fair question. And no, I have no wife. I have been too busy working and saving money to think much about settling down. Though, I suppose I am getting to the age where I should start thinking about it. He looked at her intently. What about you, Miss Graham? Is there no husband or suitor to help you with the ranch? Hannah shook her head. There was a young man I was courting a few years ago, but he moved to California to try his luck in the gold fields. I have not heard from him since. And since my father died, I have been too busy trying to keep this place running and take care of Samuel to think about such things. Fletcher nodded slowly. It cannot be easy, managing all this on your own. It is not, Hannah admitted. But I do what I must. This ranch is all Samuel and I have left of our parents. I will not lose it. What kind of ranch is it? Fletcher asked, looking around. I saw you have a few cows and some chickens, but not much else. Hannah sighed. It used to be much more. We had 30 head of cattle, a good string of horses, and plenty of chickens and pigs. But after my father died, I had to sell most of it to pay debts and buy supplies. Now, I am down to just what you saw. I have been trying to figure out how to build it back up, but I do not have the money to buy more livestock, and I do not have the help to manage a larger operation even if I could. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, and Hannah could see him thinking, working through something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. I have an idea, if you are willing to hear it. I am listening, Hannah said. I have some money saved up, like I mentioned. Not a fortune, but enough. And I have been thinking about starting my own ranch eventually, but land prices are high right now. What if we made an arrangement? I could invest in your ranch, help you build up your herd, and make some improvements. In exchange, I would get a share of the profits and a place to live while I work the land with you. Hannah stared at him in surprise. You want to become my business partner? In a manner of speaking, yes. It would benefit both of us. You get the help and resources you need to save your ranch, and I get a chance to build something of my own without having to buy land outright. Fletcher held up a hand before she could respond. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking about propriety, about what people will say if a single man moves onto a ranch owned by a single woman. That is a fair concern. So, here is what I propose. I will build myself a small cabin on the far edge of your property, away from the main house. I will do my own cooking and cleaning. We will conduct ourselves with complete propriety at all times. As far as the world is concerned, I am simply a hired hand who happens to have invested in the operation. Hannah's mind was racing. The offer was tempting, incredibly so. With Fletcher's help and investment, she could save the ranch and give Samuel a real future. But there were so many risks, so many things that could go wrong. What happens if it does not work out? She asked. What if we cannot make the ranch profitable? Or what if we find we cannot work together? Then we dissolve the partnership, Fletcher said simply. I would take my losses and move on, and you would be no worse off than you are now. But I do not think it will come to that. I am a hard worker, and from what I have seen, so are you. Together, I think we could make this place thrive. I need to think about it, Hannah said finally. This is a big decision. Of course, Fletcher agreed. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, I should get back to the Double R. Tom will be wondering where I have gotten to. But I will come back in a few days to check on Samuel and see if you have made a decision. He moved toward the door, and Hannah followed him. As he reached for his hat, she impulsively reached out and touched his arm. Mr. Kane, Fletcher, thank you for everything. Whatever I decide about your offer, please know that I will never forget your kindness. Fletcher looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went beyond words. Hannah felt her breath catch in her throat, and she saw Fletcher's eyes darken with an emotion she could not quite name. You are welcome, Hannah, he said softly, using her first name for the first time. I will see you in a few days. After he left, Hannah stood at the door for a long time, watching until he disappeared from view. Then she turned back to the cabin, to Samuel sleeping peacefully in his bed, to the bottles of medicine on the table, to the enormous pile of firewood outside the door. Fletcher Kane had ridden into her life barely 12 hours ago, and already everything felt different. The crushing weight of loneliness and despair had lifted, replaced by something she was almost afraid to name: possibility. Over the next 3 days, Samuel improved steadily under the influence of the doctor's medicine and Hannah's devoted care. His fever broke completely on the second day, and by the third day, he was sitting up in bed and asking for real food. Hannah felt a weight lift from her heart with each sign of his recovery. She spent those 3 days thinking about Fletcher's offer. She walked the boundaries of her property, surveyed the dilapidated barn and fences that needed repair, calculated how much it would cost to buy more cattle, and what kind of profit they could reasonably expect. The more she thought about it, the more sense Fletcher's proposal made. But there was more to her considerations than just business sense. She could not stop thinking about Fletcher himself, about the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his hands, the way he had appeared in her darkest hour like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to utter. She barely knew him, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. It terrified her and excited her in equal measure. On the morning of the fourth day, Hannah heard horses approaching again. She looked out the window and saw Fletcher riding up the path, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. Her heart began to race, and she found herself smoothing her hair and checking her reflection in the small mirror by the door before she caught herself and laughed at her own foolishness. She opened the door before he could knock, and Fletcher smiled when he saw her. "Good morning, Hannah. You look well rested. I take that as a good sign." "Samuel is much better," Hannah said, stepping aside to let him enter. "The medicine worked wonderfully. He is still weak, but the fever is gone and his breathing is clear." "That is excellent news." Fletcher removed his hat and moved to where Samuel was sitting up in bed, looking thin but alert. "Hello there, young man. I am Fletcher Kane. I am a friend of your sister's." Samuel looked at him with open curiosity. "Hannah told me you brought the doctor. Thank you, sir. She said you saved my life." Fletcher looked embarrassed. "I would not go that far. I just did what anyone would do. How are you feeling?" "Tired and hungry all the time," Samuel admitted. "But Hannah says that means I am getting better." "She is right." Fletcher turned back to Hannah. "I brought some supplies from town. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, beans, and some other things. I figured you might be running low after focusing all your attention on Samuel." Hannah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Fletcher, I cannot keep accepting your charity. This is too much." "It is not charity," Fletcher said firmly. "Consider it an advance on our partnership, if you have decided to accept my offer. And if you have not, then consider it payment for a few weeks of work. I am due some time off from the Double R, and I thought I might spend it making repairs around your place. Those fences need mending, and your barn door is hanging crooked. If you do not want me here, say so now, and I will leave. But if you are willing to let me help, I would like to stay." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, then at Samuel, who was watching the exchange with interest, and then back at Fletcher. She made her decision. "I accept your offer," she said clearly. "All of it. The partnership, the investment, everything. On one condition." "Name it," Fletcher said. "We draw up a proper contract, stating the terms of our partnership clearly. I want everything in writing so there can be no misunderstandings down the road. Can you read and write?" Fletcher nodded. "I can. My mother insisted all her children get proper schooling, even though we were farm kids. I can draw up a contract that will satisfy us both." "Then we have a deal." Hannah held out her hand, and Fletcher shook it firmly. His hand engulfed hers, warm and strong, and that strange electric feeling passed between them again. Over the next few weeks, Fletcher became a constant presence on the Graham Ranch. He built himself a small but comfortable cabin on the eastern edge of the property, near a stand of cottonwood trees. He spent his days making repairs, mending fences, fixing the barn door, patching holes in the roof of the main cabin. He worked from dawn until dusk, and Hannah often found herself watching him from the window as he moved around the property with tireless energy. She found herself looking forward to mealtimes, when Fletcher would join her and Samuel at the table. Samuel had taken to Fletcher immediately, following him around like a puppy whenever his strength allowed, asking endless questions about ranching and horses and life in Texas. Fletcher answered every question with patience and often taught Samuel new skills, showing him how to properly repair a fence post or care for the horses. Hannah discovered that Fletcher was easy to talk to. They would sit together in the evenings after Samuel had gone to bed, drinking coffee and discussing plans for the ranch. Fletcher had good ideas and solid business sense. He suggested they focus on breeding quality horses rather than cattle, arguing that horses commanded better prices and required less grazing land. He knew a rancher in Wyoming who had excellent breeding stock and would sell them a good stallion and several mares at a fair price. But their conversations were not limited to business. Fletcher told her stories about his childhood in Texas, about his siblings and their various adventures and misadventures. He made her laugh with tales of his youngest sister's determination to ride the most stubborn mule in the county. And he moved her to tears with his description of his mother's final days and the promise he had made her to keep the family together. Hannah found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. She talked about her mother's long illness and how helpless she had felt watching her waste away. She confessed her fears about losing the ranch and failing Samuel, about the crushing loneliness of the past 6 months, about her doubts that she was strong enough to survive in this harsh country. Fletcher listened to everything without judgment, and when she finished, he said simply, "You are the strongest woman I have ever met, Hannah Graham. You have been through hell and come out the other side still fighting. That takes a kind of courage most people will never know they have." His words settled something inside her, soothed an ache she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. As November turned to December and the first real snow began to fall, Hannah realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Fletcher Kane. It was not a sudden revelation, but rather a gradual understanding that crept up on her over countless small moments. The way he always made sure there was enough firewood stacked by her door before the snow came. The way he taught Samuel to whittle during the long winter evenings, his large hands gentle as he guided the boy's smaller ones. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not watching, with an expression that made her heart race and her skin warm. She did not know if he felt the same way. He was always perfectly proper around her, never overstepping the boundaries they had established. But sometimes she would catch him watching her, and the intensity in his eyes suggested his feelings might mirror her own. December brought hard cold and several significant snowstorms. The ranch work slowed during the worst of the weather, and the three of them spent more time inside, gathered around the fire. Fletcher taught Samuel to play chess using a set he had carved from spare wood, and Hannah worked on mending clothes and sewing a new shirt for Samuel, who was growing like a weed now that he had recovered from his illness. One evening, about a week before Christmas, Samuel had gone to bed early, and Fletcher and Hannah sat together by the fire, unusually quiet. The snow was falling heavily outside, and the wind howled around the corners of the cabin, but inside it was warm and peaceful. "Hannah," Fletcher said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from her mending, her heart beginning to pound. "Of course. Do you ever regret accepting my offer? Letting me stay here and become your partner?" He was staring into the fire, not looking at her, and she could see tension in his shoulders. "No," Hannah said honestly. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that?" Fletcher was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because I have been here almost 2 months now, and I realize that my reasons for wanting to stay have changed. When I first made the offer, it was purely practical, a business arrangement that would benefit us both. But now—" He trailed off, finally turning to look at her. "Now I stay for reasons that have nothing to do with business." Hannah set down her mending, her hands trembling slightly. "What reasons?" Fletcher stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling down so they were at eye level. "I am staying because I have fallen in love with you, Hannah Graham. I think I started falling that first night when I saw you out there in the dark, exhausted and frightened but refusing to give up. Every day since then, I have fallen a little more. The way you care for Samuel, the way you fight for this ranch, the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, the way you look in the morning light coming through the window. All of it. I love all of it. I love you." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too, Fletcher. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. I thought maybe I was imagining the way you looked at me, wishful thinking because I wanted so badly for you to feel the same way I do." Fletcher reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You were not imagining anything. I have been trying to hide my feelings because I did not want to complicate our arrangement or make you uncomfortable, but I cannot hide them anymore. I love you, Hannah, and I want to spend my life with you, if you will have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Hannah whispered, hardly daring to believe this was happening. "Yes," Fletcher said firmly. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, and some people might say that is too soon. But I know my own heart, and I know what I want. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build this ranch with you, not just as a business partner, but as your husband. I want to give Samuel a proper family again, and maybe someday give him siblings of his own. I want everything with you, Hannah. Will you marry me? Hannah did not hesitate. Yes, yes, I will marry you, Fletcher Kane. Fletcher pulled her down from her chair and kissed her, and Hannah felt like she was on fire and freezing and flying all at the same time. His lips were warm and gentle at first, then more insistent, and she responded with equal passion, wrapping her arms around his neck and losing herself in the sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. I promise I will spend every day of my life making you happy, he murmured. I will work hard. I will provide for you and Samuel, and I will love you with everything I have. I know you will, Hannah said. You have already proven yourself to be the best man I have ever known. I cannot wait to be your wife. They told Samuel the next morning at breakfast. The boy's face lit up with genuine joy, and he launched himself at Fletcher, hugging him tightly. Does this mean you are going to be my brother? Samuel asked excitedly. I suppose it does, Fletcher said, hugging the boy back. How do you feel about that? I think it is the best thing that has happened since Papa died, Samuel said honestly. I like you, Fletcher. I am glad you are going to stay with us forever. Fletcher looked over Samuel's head at Hannah, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. I am glad too, Sam, gladder than you know. They decided to get married as soon as possible. Fletcher rode into Colorado City and spoke with the circuit preacher, who agreed to perform the ceremony on Christmas Day. It seemed fitting, Hannah thought, to begin their married life on a day associated with hope and new beginnings. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Hannah made herself a new dress from fabric she had been saving, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. Fletcher cleaned himself up, shaved properly for the first time since Hannah had known him, and wore his best clothes, which turned out to be surprisingly fine. He looked handsome and nervous in equal measure when Christmas morning arrived. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in Colorado City with only a handful of witnesses. Samuel stood beside them, beaming with pride. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Fletcher kissed her, Hannah felt a completeness she had not known was possible. This was right. This was what her life was supposed to be. They returned to the ranch that afternoon, and Fletcher moved his belongings from his cabin to the main house. That night, after Samuel had gone to bed, Fletcher carried Hannah over the threshold of what was now their bedroom, and they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and amazed. I never knew it could be like this, Hannah whispered later, lying in Fletcher's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Neither did I, Fletcher admitted, stroking her hair gently. I have imagined this moment many times over the past weeks, but the reality is so much better than anything I dreamed. The winter passed peacefully. Fletcher and Hannah settled into married life with surprising ease, as if they had been together for years rather than months. They worked side by side during the days, making plans for the spring when they would purchase the horses Fletcher had spoken about. In the evenings, they sat together with Samuel, reading or playing games or simply talking. And at night, they explored the depths of their love and passion for each other, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal devotion. Spring arrived with a rush of melting snow and budding trees. In late March, Fletcher made the journey to Wyoming and returned with a magnificent black stallion and 6 quality mares. He had spent a significant portion of his savings, but his eyes shone with excitement as he showed Hannah the horses. These are the foundation of our future, he said. With proper breeding and care, we will have the best horses in Colorado Territory within a few years. He was right. The horses thrived under their care, and by early summer, 3 of the mares were visibly pregnant. Fletcher built a proper stable and expanded the grazing pastures. Samuel, now 15 and growing into a strong young man, took on more responsibilities around the ranch, proving himself to be a capable and hard-working hand. In June, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening after Samuel had gone to bed, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet despite her laughing protests, and spun her around, his face alight with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Hannah, we are going to have a baby." "I know," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Fletcher said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "I am ecstatic, overjoyed, blessed beyond measure. When?" "January, I think, maybe early February." Fletcher knelt down and pressed his ear to her stomach, as if he could already hear the baby's heartbeat. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father speaking. I cannot wait to meet you." Hannah ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had ridden into her life on a cold November night and changed everything. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Hannah continued working on the ranch, though Fletcher became increasingly protective as she grew larger, constantly worrying that she was doing too much or working too hard. In October, the first foals were born, 3 healthy colts that showed every sign of becoming excellent horses. Fletcher was proven right about his investment. In December, Fletcher hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men from town who were eager for steady work and willing to learn. This freed up more time for Fletcher to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. He built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving their initials and the date into the headboard. Hannah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. On a cold night in early February of 1884, Hannah went into labor. Fletcher sent one of the ranch hands racing into town to fetch the doctor while he stayed with Hannah, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. Samuel hovered nervously nearby until Fletcher gently suggested he might be more useful, boiling water and gathering clean towels. The labor was long and difficult. For several hours, Fletcher feared he might lose Hannah, and the terror in his eyes cut through even the worst of her pain. But she was strong, and when dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a loud, healthy cry. Fletcher cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as the doctor placed the baby in Hannah's arms. He was perfect, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same warm brown as his father's. "He is beautiful," Fletcher whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed and putting his arm around Hannah, the two of them gazing down at their son in wonder. "You are beautiful. You are both so beautiful." "What should we name him?" Hannah asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Fletcher thought for a moment. "James, after my father. James Fletcher Kane, if that is all right with you." "James Fletcher Kane," Hannah repeated, testing out the name. "I love it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, little one." Samuel came in shortly after the doctor left, his face full of awe as he looked at his tiny nephew. "He is so small," he said wonderingly. "Can I hold him?" Hannah showed Samuel how to support the baby's head, and Samuel sat carefully in the chair, cradling James with surprising gentleness. "I am your Uncle Sam," he told the baby seriously. "I am going to teach you everything I know about horses and ranching. You are going to love it here." Fletcher looked at Hannah over Samuel's head, and she saw her own contentment reflected in his eyes. They had built something real and lasting, a family, a home, a future. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered beyond their initial hopes. Fletcher's instinct about breeding horses proved correct, and within 3 years, they were known throughout Colorado Territory for producing quality animals. They expanded their operations, purchased more land, and hired additional help. James was followed by a daughter, Lucy, in 1886, and another son, Daniel, in 1889. The house rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, and Fletcher proved to be a devoted and loving father. He taught James to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he braided Lucy's hair with surprising skill. He read them stories every night, and he never lost his patience, even when they were at their most trying. Samuel grew into a fine young man. He married in 1887, a sweet girl named Martha from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the eastern section of the property, near the cabin Fletcher had originally constructed for himself. Samuel remained an integral part of the ranching operation, and Fletcher formally made him a partner in the business, giving him a share of the profits equal to his contribution. In 1892, Fletcher's youngest brother, Timothy, arrived from Texas, looking for a fresh start after a failed business venture. Fletcher welcomed him warmly and gave him a job on the ranch. Within a year, Timothy had married a widow from town and started his own family, adding more life and laughter to their growing community. The original Graham Ranch, which had been on the verge of extinction when Fletcher first arrived, had transformed into a thriving enterprise that supported multiple families. Hannah often thought about that cold November night in 1882 when she had been out in the dark, exhausted and frightened, trying to chop wood to keep her brother warm. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything, how desperate and alone she had felt. And then she would look at Fletcher, still strong and handsome, despite the gray that had begun to appear at his temples, and she would remember the sound of hoofbeats in the darkness, the feeling of the axe being lifted from her tired hands, the kindness in a stranger's eyes. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1893, Fletcher took Hannah into town for a rare evening away from the children. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant and then walked together through the quiet streets, their breath-making clouds in the cold air. "Do you remember that first night?" Fletcher asked, pulling her close against the cold. "When I found you chopping wood?" "I remember everything about that night," Hannah said. "I remember thinking I had reached the end of my strength and my hope, and then there you were, like a miracle." "I was the one who was blessed," Fletcher said. "I thought I was just helping a neighbor in need. I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would become my whole world." They stopped walking, and Fletcher turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Hannah Kane, you have given me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to hope for. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love deeper than I thought possible. Every day I wake up grateful that I happened to be riding past your ranch that night." Hannah reached up and cupped his face in her hands, no longer wearing the rough calluses of those desperate early days, but still strong and capable. "And every day I wake up grateful that you stopped, that you cared enough to help a stranger, that you saw something worth staying for." Fletcher kissed her there in the middle of the street, not caring who might see, and Hannah kissed him back with all the love and passion that had only grown stronger over the years. They returned home late that night to find the children all asleep and the house peaceful. They checked on each child, pulling up blankets and brushing hair back from sleeping faces. Then they retired to their own room, the room that had once been Hannah's alone, where she had spent so many lonely nights wondering how she would survive. As Fletcher pulled her into his arms and she settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Hannah thought about the strange and wonderful paths life could take. She had lost so much, her parents, her security, nearly her hope itself. But from that darkness and despair had come this brilliant, beautiful light, a love that had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Years continued to pass in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The ranch continued to thrive. James, their eldest, showed a natural talent for training horses and took over that aspect of the operation when he turned 16. Lucy proved to have a head for business and began handling the ranch's accounts and negotiations when she was barely 18. Daniel, their youngest son born in 1889, inherited his father's wandering spirit and, after learning everything he could about ranching, set off to see more of the growing West, though he always returned home for important occasions. Samuel's family grew as well, and soon the ranch was populated with nieces and nephews who ran wild through the pastures and learned to ride before they could properly walk. Sunday dinners became enormous affairs, with 3 tables pushed together to accommodate everyone, filled with laughter and stories and the comfortable chaos of a large, loving family. In 1902, 20 years after that fateful November night, Colorado City held a celebration for its 30th anniversary as an established town. The town had grown considerably, with a proper school, a hospital, 3 churches, and even a small opera house. The celebration committee asked Fletcher and Hannah to speak about the early days of settling in the territory, recognizing them as pillars of the community. Fletcher was reluctant at first, never comfortable being the center of attention, but Hannah convinced him. On a warm June evening, they stood together on the platform erected in the town square, surrounded by hundreds of townspeople, many of whom they had known for 2 decades. Fletcher spoke about the challenges of building a life in harsh country, about the importance of community and helping your neighbors. He talked about hard work and perseverance and faith in better days ahead. But mostly he talked about love. 20 years ago, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air, I was a drifting cowboy with nothing to my name but a horse, a few dollars, and some half-formed dreams. I had no idea where my life was heading or if I would ever find a place to truly call home. And then one cold November night, I came across a woman chopping wood in the dark, struggling to keep her sick brother warm, refusing to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. He turned to look at Hannah, standing beside him, her hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes still as bright and beautiful as they had been that first night. I took the axe from her hands and finished chopping that wood, thinking I was just doing a neighborly good deed. But in taking that axe, I found my home. I found my purpose. I found my love. Everything good in my life began that night. My wife, my children, this ranch we have built, the community we are part of, all of it traces back to that one moment when I decided to stop and help someone in need. He paused, looking out at the crowd. So, my advice to all of you, especially you young people just starting out, is simple. Stop and help. When you see someone struggling in the darkness, do not ride past. Stop and take the axe. You never know what blessings might come from a simple act of kindness. The crowd erupted in applause, and Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. After all these years, Fletcher still had the power to move her deeply with his words and his heart. That night, lying in bed in their comfortable home, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, the photographs on the walls, the sounds of family sleeping peacefully throughout the house, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Fletcher," she whispered into the darkness, "are you awake?" "Yes," he replied, pulling her closer. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Hannah said. "About that first night, about how desperate I was, about how you appeared like an answer to a prayer, about our wedding and the births of our children, and building this life together, about how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Fletcher corrected gently. "I was lost until I found you. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start building. We built each other," Hannah said. "That is what I love most about us. We did not just fall in love. We built a love, piece by piece, day by day, through hard work and dedication and choosing each other over and over again." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "And I will keep choosing you, every day, for as long as I live. And I will keep choosing you," Hannah promised. They lay there in comfortable silence, and Hannah thought about all the people whose lives had intertwined with theirs over the years. Samuel, now the father of 5, still living on the ranch and helping run the operation. Timothy, Fletcher's brother, who had found his own happiness and built his own family on the land. The ranch hands who had come and gone over the years, some moving on to their own homesteads, others staying and becoming like family. The neighbors who had helped during difficult times and celebrated during good ones. And she thought about their children, now grown or nearly so, each finding their own path, but all rooted in the values Fletcher and Hannah had instilled in them. Hard work, kindness, community, love. In 1908, James married a rancher's daughter from Wyoming, and Fletcher and Hannah became grandparents for the first time when a baby girl was born the following spring. Holding that tiny bundle, seeing Fletcher's features reflected in another generation, Hannah felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. Lucy surprised them all by announcing she wanted to attend college in Denver to study business. Fletcher initially balked at the idea of his daughter leaving the ranch, but Hannah supported Lucy's ambition, remembering her own struggles and determination. They sent Lucy off with their blessing and enough money to see her through, and she made them proud by excelling in her studies and eventually returning to Colorado City to open her own business, a mercantile that quickly became one of the most successful in town. Daniel, true to his wandering nature, spent years traveling throughout the West before finally settling in Montana, where he started his own horse breeding operation, using the knowledge and stock from his father's ranch. He visited regularly and wrote long, entertaining letters about his adventures. As Hannah and Fletcher moved into their 50s, they gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to James and Samuel, though Fletcher could never quite retire completely. He still rose early every morning to check on the horses, still spent hours mending fences or breaking colts, still found his greatest peace in hard work and the land he had helped build into something lasting. In the summer of 1912, exactly 30 years after Fletcher had first ridden onto Hannah's property, the family threw a massive celebration. All 3 of their children returned home, bringing spouses and grandchildren. Fletcher's siblings came from Texas and various western territories. Samuel's entire family was there, of course, 3 generations now living on or near the original Graham Ranch. They roasted several pigs, and the women spent days preparing food. There was music and dancing, games for the children, and in the evening, around a massive bonfire, people took turns sharing their favorite stories and memories. When it was Hannah's turn to speak, she stood with Fletcher beside her, his arm around her waist, and looked out at the sea of faces, many of them bearing features she recognized from her own bloodline or Fletcher's. This gathering, this family, this community had all grown from one cold night and one act of simple kindness. 30 years ago, she began, and the crowd quieted to hear her. I thought my life was over. I had lost both parents. I was about to lose my brother to illness. I was about to lose my home and the last connection to my family's legacy. I was 22 years old, and I felt ancient with grief and exhaustion and hopelessness. She paused, looking up at Fletcher. And then a cowboy found me chopping wood in the dark. He took the axe from my hands and finished the pile for me. Such a simple thing, really, chopping wood. But it was not just about the wood. It was about someone seeing my struggle and choosing to help. It was about someone seeing me at my lowest moment and offering hope. Her voice grew stronger. That cowboy became my husband, my partner, my greatest love. Together we built this ranch, raised our children, and created a legacy I hope will continue for generations. But more than that, we built a family founded on the same principle that brought us together. We help each other, we see someone struggling, and we take the axe. We finish the pile. We show up in the darkness with help and hope. She looked around at all the faces, seeing the impact of that philosophy reflected in every person there. So, thank you, Fletcher Kane, for stopping that night. Thank you for taking the axe. Thank you for changing my life. And thank you to all of you, our children, our grandchildren, our extended family and friends, for continuing to live by those values and for making this celebration possible. The applause was thunderous, and Hannah found herself swept into embrace after embrace, everyone wanting to share their love and congratulations. But through it all, Fletcher remained by her side, solid and steady, just as he had been for 30 years. Later that night, long after the guests had departed or retired to various rooms and cabins around the property, Hannah and Fletcher took a walk together under the stars. They wandered toward the old woodpile area where Fletcher had first found her, though the location had changed many times over the years as the ranch expanded and evolved. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just kept riding that night? Hannah asked. Fletcher considered the question seriously. Sometimes. I imagine I would have continued working for Tom Reeves for a few more years, maybe eventually saved enough to buy a small piece of land somewhere and tried to make a go of it alone. I probably would have married eventually, had a family. But it would not have been this. It would not have been you. And I cannot imagine a life without you, Hannah. It would have been like living in black and white when I could have had color. Hannah squeezed his hand. I do not think I would have survived much longer without you. I was so close to breaking. Another few weeks, maybe a month, and I would have had to give up the ranch. Probably would have had to put Samuel in someone else's care while I found work in town. Our lives would have gone in completely different directions, and we never would have found each other. Then I am grateful beyond words that I was riding past that night, that I saw your light, that I decided to stop, Fletcher said. Every good thing in my life came from that one decision. They stood there in the darkness, much as they had 30 years earlier, though everything was different now. Then they had been strangers. Now they were partners in every sense of the word, their lives so intertwined that neither could imagine existing without the other. Then Hannah had been struggling alone in desperation. Now she was surrounded by family and security, standing on land that bore the mark of her and Fletcher's combined efforts and dreams. I love you, Hannah said, the words as true now as the first time she had spoken them. I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if such things are possible. They are possible, Fletcher said with certainty, because I will love you beyond death, beyond time itself. You are written on my soul, Hannah Kane. You always will be. They kissed there in the darkness, and it felt like coming home, like every kiss they had ever shared and would ever share, all contained in this one perfect moment. The years continued their steady march forward. Hannah and Fletcher grew older, their hair turning white, their movements slower but no less purposeful. They watched with pride and joy as their grandchildren grew, as the ranch continued to prosper under James and Samuel's management, as Lucy's business expanded throughout the territory, as Daniel built his own legacy in Montana. In 1920, as Colorado prepared to celebrate statehood, Hannah and Fletcher were recognized as pioneer settlers, honored at a ceremony in Denver, attended by the governor himself. They accepted the recognition with humble gratitude, but both agreed later that their true legacy was not in the land they had cultivated or the business they had built. It was in the family they had created and the values they had instilled. Fletcher's health began to decline in his early 70s. He developed a persistent cough that the doctor said came from years of working in dust and harsh conditions. He slowed down considerably, but refused to stop working entirely, still insisting on his morning rounds to check the horses, still finding joy in teaching his grandchildren and great-grandchildren to ride. Hannah watched him carefully, seeing the signs even when he tried to hide them. She had been by his side for over 40 years, and she could read him like a book. She saw the moments of pain he tried to conceal, the exhaustion he tried to power through, the way his breath came harder after any exertion. On a mild March evening in 1924, after a quiet dinner with just the two of them, Fletcher asked Hannah to walk with him one more time to the place where they had first met. She bundled him up warmly, ignoring his protests that he was fine, and they made their way slowly across the ranch land. The woodpile was long gone, of course, replaced by modern conveniences and better organization. But they knew the spot, had marked it in their memories with complete accuracy. They stood there together, Fletcher leaning heavily on his cane, Hannah supporting him with her arm around his waist. 42 years, Fletcher said softly. 42 years since I found you chopping wood in the dark. It feels like yesterday, and like forever at the same time. We have had a good life, Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion, because she knew what he was trying to tell her. The best life. You gave me everything, Fletcher. We gave each other everything, he corrected. I was just a drifting cowboy until I found you. You made me into a man worth being, a husband, a father, a grandfather. You gave meaning to every day of my life. They stood in silence for a long time, holding each other, remembering. Finally, Fletcher spoke again. When my time comes, I want you to know that I will have no regrets. I lived fully, I loved completely, and I was loved in return. What more could any man ask for? Do not talk like that, Hannah said, even though she knew it was futile. You are going to be fine. Fletcher smiled and cupped her face in his hand, his touch still capable of making her heart race after all these years. We have both known for a while that my time is getting short. I am not afraid, Hannah. How could I be? I am leaving behind a legacy of love and family that will endure for generations. And wherever I am going, I will be waiting for you, counting the days until we can be together again. Tears streamed down Hannah's face. I do not know how to be in this world without you. Yes, you do, Fletcher said firmly. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You will grieve, and that is right and proper. But then, you will continue. You will watch our grandchildren grow. You will hold our great-great-grandchildren. You will see the fruits of everything we built together. And you will live fully, just as I want you to, until the day we can be reunited. Fletcher Kane passed peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, on a quiet April morning. He was 74 years old, and he died in the home he had helped build, surrounded by the family he adored. Hannah was holding his hand when he drew his last breath, and she felt the exact moment his spirit left, felt the profound emptiness that opened up where his presence had always been. The funeral was one of the largest Colorado City had ever seen. People came from all over the territory and beyond to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his kindness, and his unwavering devotion to family and community. Fletcher was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, in a spot he had chosen himself years earlier, with a view of the mountains to the west and the grazing pastures below. Hannah grieved deeply. For weeks she moved through the house like a ghost, unable to find purpose or joy in anything. Her children worried about her, taking turns staying with her, making sure she ate and rested. But slowly, gradually, Hannah found her way back to living. She remembered Fletcher's words, his insistence that she continue fully, and she honored his memory by doing exactly that. She spent her remaining years surrounded by family, watching with joy as the ranch continued to thrive under the next generation's care. She told stories about Fletcher to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive and vibrant. She taught her great-grandchildren about the values that had guided her and Fletcher's lives: hard work, kindness, the importance of helping others, and the power of love. On November evenings, when the air turned cold and reminded her of that long-ago night, Hannah would sometimes stand outside and remember. She would remember being young and desperate and exhausted, trying to chop wood in the darkness. She would remember the sound of hoofbeats, the kindness in a stranger's eyes, the feeling of the axe being lifted from her tired hands. And she would remember everything that had grown from that one night. A love deeper than she had known was possible, a family that stretched across generations, a legacy of kindness and community, a life fully lived in partnership with a man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to help, to stay, to love. Hannah Graham Cain lived to the remarkable age of 93. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1953, 71 years after a cowboy had found her chopping wood in the dark. She was buried beside Fletcher on the hillside, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, their dates, and a single inscription chosen by their children. They took the axe for each other and built a love that endures forever. The ranch they had built together, saved from the edge of extinction and transformed into a thriving legacy, continued to prosper under their descendants' care. The values they had instilled, the lessons they had taught, the love they had demonstrated, all of it lived on in every person who carried their blood or had been touched by their story. And on cold November nights, when the wind blew down from the mountains and families gathered around fires for warmth, the story was still told, about the young woman chopping wood in the dark, struggling alone, refusing to give up, about the cowboy who stopped to help, who took the axe and finished the pile, about how a simple act of kindness on one cold night had grown into a love story for the ages, a legacy that would endure as long as people remembered the importance of stopping in the darkness to help someone in need. The end came not with sadness, but with completion. Every thread tied off, every promise fulfilled, every dream realized. Fletcher and Hannah Cain had taken an axe passed between them in the darkness and used it to build a life, a family, a legacy. They had shown that love, real and lasting love, grew not from grand gestures, but from the steady accumulation of kindness, partnership, and choosing each other every single day. Their story became part of the fabric of Colorado City's history, told and retold, changed and embellished over the decades, but always returning to the same core truth, that one person, stopping to help another in their time of need, could change everything. That love could grow from the darkest moments. That kindness was never wasted. And that the simple act of taking the axe from tired hands could lead to a lifetime of joy, purpose, and profound connection. In the end, it was not about the ranch or the horses or the business success, though all of that mattered. It was about two people who found each other in the darkness, who built something beautiful together through hard work and dedication and unwavering love, and who left behind a legacy that would ripple forward through generations, touching lives they would never meet, but whose existence was made possible by that first act of kindness on a cold November night in 1882.